I don't know if you've ever noticed, but almost every community does this. When there's a sports team, like a high school team, that goes to the state championship, the people not only rally behind the team, but when the team comes home after the big game, they come together to celebrate. And I've known some communities where people would even go out maybe a mile outside of town at a crossroads, and they'd wait for the school bus to come, the bus that was bringing the team back, and they would literally and formally escort them into town. And then they would go to the gymnasium where there'd be a rally and the band would play and everybody would get excited. They really would take pride in their hometown team, and they would honor the players. But lest you think that's just something that communities, especially smaller towns and high schools do, it's done at other levels as well. Go back just a few months ago to the World Series when the Atlanta Braves became the world champions. And they came back to Atlanta, and there was a crowd of 400,000 to greet them there. They celebrated their hometown team. And if you go back to last February, for the Super Bowl of last year, when the Tampa Bay Buccaneers won, of course they were going to celebrate. But in Tampa, you can do things a little bit differently. So they had a boat parade, and all the players were on boats going down the river, and all the fans could stand along the banks and cheer them on while still having some social distance. But they could hope to catch a glimpse of their favorite players. What's going on? Well, towns and communities take great pride in the success stories. When a son or daughter does well, we celebrate with them. We honor them. We sort of claim them as our own. And this is a good thing to do because, we want to support other people. But it also has its dangers because sometimes if it's a hometown person, we not only claim them as our own, but we almost act like we own them, and even worse, control them. And that's what was going on in this gospel reading today. Pick up from last week. Jesus went to his hometown. He had grown up in Nazareth, although he as an adult lived in Capernaum. He was back in Nazareth in the synagogue, which is a relatively small place to pray. He had read from the prophet Isaiah, chapter 61, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me and has anointed me." Anointed means I'm the Messiah. I'm the Christ. Has anointed me to bring glad tidings to the poor. And then when Jesus sat down, it was the opening line of today's reading, where Jesus says, "This has been fulfilled in your hearing." And they marveled. He was a hometown boy. They honored him. But just that quickly, they started to turn around and say, wait a minute. The Messiah, the anointed one, we expect the anointed one is going to come in power. We expect the anointed one is going to be probably among the wealthy. We expect the noble one, the anointed one, will have nobility, and furthermore, we won't really know them so well. They will come in majesty. And yet this guy, this is Joseph's son. How can he be the one? It's a way of controlling. We know him. He's Joseph's boy. Now, I grew up in a small town. My father's name was Frank, but there were two Frank Webers. And so for some reason, they gave my dad a nickname so they could tell them apart. My dad was a mechanic, and actually a very good mechanic, but he was also very meticulous and very slow. So his nickname was Speed. Speed Weber. And I can remember as a kid meeting some people that were maybe contemporaries of my parents, and they would say, "Oh, you must be one of Speed's boys." I can admit that I took pride in that because my father was well liked. I did not complain that they didn't know which one I was. I'm one of 7 sons, and so even my own parents didn't know which one of the boys I was. But one of Speed's boys. That was a way of identifying me. At the same time, I knew full well they didn't know me. They knew the lineage. They knew my father. They did not know me. So to say this is Joseph's boy is basically to say, well, we think we know him, but we don't really. And here's what I've discovered. When a person thinks that he or she already knows, then they tend to remain closed. And when they're closed, they end up usually being opposed to whatever's new. And that's what happened. They think they knew who Jesus was, so their minds and hearts were closed to the real message. And of course, Jesus made it even more challenging when he says, you're closed because you think you know, but faith is not just to those who are in the inner circle. And he used the two examples of Elijah, the great prophet, and Elijah's disciple, Elisha. They were both well known and wonderfully honored in the Old Testament. But Elijah provided food for the widow Zarephath. Zarephath was right up the coast in modern-day Lebanon, in Sidon. It was Gentile country, or they may have called them pagans at that time. Naaman the Syrian was obviously from Syria, which is also north. And then, as is happening now, Israel and Syria were always enemies. So Jesus uses two examples of outsiders who were able to acknowledge through the eyes of faith what the insiders did not acknowledge. In other words, sometimes, and this is where it really affects us, sometimes we are so close to something that we no longer see. We suffer from proximity. Because we are close, we think we know, and we're no longer open to the message. Jesus is the Messiah, and he's working in wondrous ways, and his love is vast and beyond our limitations. We're the ones who put borders on God's love. Jesus did not. So Jesus was not accepted in his home place. We are people of faith. We have gathered here on a cold winter morning because we do believe there is something important in our life that we call faith. But we don't want to suffer from the problem of proximity. We don't want to be closed. We want to have our eyes, our ears, our hearts open to the Lord.